Good morning, district community. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here bright and early on Friday for the Spring 2025 Budget Town Hall Workshop. I wanted to let you know that the Q&A function is available in and open, so feel free throughout to provide questions in the Q&A. We'll do our best to be answering them throughout the budget town hall, and also if we don't get to all the questions today, we'll certainly be following up afterwards. So I feel like just taking a minute to take a look at all your beautiful faces. It's such a honor and a privilege to be here today presenting alongside our COO, Greg Nelson. And I want to just offer my my deep appreciation to Greg for his leadership, his ingenuity and creativity since he's entered the district, working very, very hard on behalf of you all and our student community. So we'll go ahead and give you an overview of what we plan to discuss today.
Can anyone hear me? I can't hear anything on the video.
Robert, we can hear, I think everybody can hear me. I heard you, so I don't know what's going on for your sound. So let's go ahead and give you an overview of today. Next slide, please, Greg. So we're going to be, I'm going to be providing a little bit of an overview of the governor's 2025-2026 budget proposal that just came out in January, kind of centering some of the challenges for long-range planning that I've been talking to the district community about over the last year. We're going to be looking at our fiscal trends again and giving a sense for the impact that's going to be happening to 25-26. We'll also be sharing the larger reserve recommendation that will be coming forward and talking really about how we can work together to love our future and some next steps for our district community. Next slide. So the governor's January 2025-26 budget proposal came out, and I want to give you some high-level highlights as it relates to community colleges. So the proposed budget changes for 25-26, total budget of $322.2 billion, which is an increase of about $24 billion from 24-25. General fund spending of the budget is about $228.9 billion, which is an increase from $17 billion last year. There is a major focus on the master plan for career education. For those of you who have been paying attention, the governor has created a master plan for career education. The executive summary has been out, sort of giving sort of a sense around pathways and a career passport that he's envisioned. We're waiting for additional details to be released soon. There's been identified additional ongoing spending of about $234.4 million for a real increase. So this is a cost of living, a COLA adjustment of about 2.43% was in the proposed budget. Again, there's also $28.7 million for COLA adjustments to certain categorical programs. And I want to just provide some context here really quickly. So we have many different things. We have a general fund apportionment funding, right? What we call our general fund or Fund 1. We also have categorical programs. Some are statutory. They are in, right, regulation and code like EOPS and our disabled students programs and services programs. But there are many other categorical programs that are in and we are funded to serve students for. These all don't get COLA. So I want to explain, as COLA keeps happening in the district, it might happen for the funding formula or these different things. Not every program gets COLA. So that means we take on the expenses for cost of living increases, for increases to expenditures and those things out of the general fund budget when those don't match. So there are codified programs that these are called out for in the budget. And so we would be eligible for some of that thing. And then in addition, you'll see that the governor believes that there'll be growth for the system. And so there's about $30 million set aside for system-wide enrollment growth at about 5%. Next slide. So some of the proposed overview for community colleges that you'll see here is it's really a balanced 25-26 budget, right? With a modest surplus due to the strong stock market, savings from operational efficiencies, and elimination of some of the state government positions. So as we're all doing, right, there has been some actual work to sort of support um, uh, tightening efficiencies at the state level. The governor's proposal calls out again $30 million in ongoing funding to expand the Rising Scholars Network. So we also, our district is actually very involved with the Rising Scholars Network. So we're pleased to see continued support for our justice impacted, formerly incarcerated students and the work we're doing. There's 29 million in ongoing funding and about 133.5 million in one-time funding to create a common cloud data platform for our system where data will be shared and these kind of things. So this is technology improvements that the state is looking at, including 168 million in one-time funding to complete the statewide technology transformation that's been worked on. And then we have 93 million in one time and 7 million in ongoing to scale up credit for prior learning and allowing real world experience to be converted to college credit. So you all have been, many of our faculty have been working very diligently on doing credit for prior learning. This especially impacts our veterans and military members as well. So important to say, we've been talking about this quite frequently, and I know you all have been talking about it for some time, which is the sunsetting of hold harmless, which has been a provision that the state's provided to allow us protection so that while our full-time equivalent students, so how we get funded based on apportionment, while that number has declined, we have stayed and been able to receive increases based on hold harmless. But this is next year will be the first year without hold harmless protection. That means that we are flat in our funding. So FTS is built on a 3-year average. So that will be based on our 2022-23 all the way up to this year's FTS calculations. That 3-year average will help determine where we're hitting, whether or not we're hitting that funding floor that we've had. And the way we're going at right now does not look like we will surpass that funding floor or grab any of the growth that's available for our district. So we've been talking about this in some of these meetings that I've been doing both in my spring flex and fall flex presentations and the budget presentations we've done throughout the district. Again, we'll continue to have those. If you remember the SCIF, the student-centered funding formula, supplemental points, again, are going to be based on the 24-25 head count of AB 540 students, Pell Grant recipients, and California Promise Grant recipients. And then those success metrics, right, that other 10% of the funding formula will be on that 3-year rolling head count average based starting in 22-23. So the district's total computational revenue, so remember we've talked about how we actually take all of these pieces and put it together, right? Our total revenue will no longer be able to receive cumulative COLAs. So to be clear, that 2.43% COLA that is being proposed by the governor is not, our district will not be eligible for that going forward until we surpass the full-time equivalent students that we need to reach for where we've been funded consistently over the last several years. And there really is no new unrestricted ongoing funding into the district SCIF, right, until we get out of that hold harmless calculation. So I want to just clarify for everybody sort of what and reinforce what I've been sharing in the presentations over the last year. So let's talk a little bit about and recenter those challenges for long range planning. So again, first up there, I've just talked about, right, that continual decline in full-time equivalent students and how that's hitting us as it relates to our budget. We've also had challenges meeting our unrestricted reserve policy of 16.67%. And so really needing, and that's a long range challenge for us as well. We've also had, and you all know this, living and working in this community, seeing the spaces that we've had, we really have not had funding set aside for furniture, equipment, and really those ongoing costs for maintenance, right, that we need. So it's not really even, it's scheduled maintenance, deferred maintenance, things that we haven't had here in the district. We have not had set aside funds to be able to address that outside of actually bond funds, which are not for deferred maintenance. Those are for new projects and equipment and things like that. So dollars for the ongoing maintenance of our facilities have continued to be a stressor for us and for all of you. We have the other post-employment benefits. So we have an OPEB trust that helps pay for retiree health insurance and our current employee health insurance. And Peralta has the lowest percentage of funding statewide of that trust. And so this creates instability for us both internally and externally related to our finances and the way we're looked at by ACCJC, our accrediting agency, outside creditors, and the California Community College Chancellor's Office. We've got these increasing demands. You all know this. The cost of everything is going up, right? And so that includes the cost of health insurance, those demands on us. So again, we saw new rates are now set for 10% for the 2025 calendar year when we only originally budget 5.69%. So we see these things happening and we had to make changes from the tentative budget to the adopted budget to adjust for the pieces that are needed. We also have the need to address the outstanding level of student debt in the district, which is currently over $37 million. And so that is one of these huge things that we also need to be addressing and considering how we continue to support student access and success, but also understand that need around our student debt ceiling and what that means for the district. I talked a little bit about that ongoing fiscal monitoring that we have. And then I want to just point out on here, I have external credit rating agencies due to our fiscal instability. Those things are like Moody's, S&P, Fitch. So I just want to explain this because some people said, why do you care about those, three conglomerate, like whatever, what does it mean? Well, it actually means something to our community and it means something to the taxpayers who believe in us and the dollars that we spend and use on behalf of those communities. So the way I consider you thinking about it's like your personal credit score. What that is our district's personal credit score is looked at and rated, and that means what the value is that we can get for the money we borrow and what we get, and that gets passed on to the taxpayers if we do not have good ratings. And so we want to make sure that we're being fiscally right solvent and responsible so that we can actually meet those needs and be able to get the most for our district and our community. And then we have this thing called the deficit factor, which is what I call an IOU. So when the state isn't sure whether they're getting revenues or not, or things are changing, and let me put this into context. We have seen the devastating fires that have happened in Southern California. Our hearts go out to our colleagues and friends, decimated multiple, like completely gone multiple school districts, multiple communities. We've seen the impacts of those fires in Northern California, and we don't have to look back too long to remember the devastating fires here in the Oakland Hills. We know what these things are like. So because so much of our revenue is based on income tax, property taxes, those particular things, these things make fluctuations in the state budget. And so we're trying best to handle this. And so sometimes what they do is they hold back funds and ask us to reduce because they need to make sure they have cash flow and being able to pay back those IOUs. So these are some of these challenges. And then I want to just sort of put it in context. So many of you know that we've had monitoring by our accrediting agency and actually monitoring by the state chancellor's office. We're currently in that state. But in 2008, we had a report done by the Financial Review and Fiscal Health Risk Analysis by the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team in 2019. And we also then subsequently as a district went out and had multiple reports by multiple people to kind of actually coincide with the report that we got from FCMAT. It's called FCMAT. And what they did is several of these reports listed the things that were were recommendations in the FICPAT report, and you can see them here, right? Consider adjusting staffing based on FTS. The report calls out the decline and precipitous decline of our full-time equivalent students coming to our colleges, and the fact that we had not adjusted for those things in terms of personnel, in terms of scheduling offerings, and be more thoughtful about those things. There are recommendations to develop supplemental and student success outcome metrics. So that's why I've been at the colleges talking about how the funding formula works and what those pieces are and how we can better understand this together. And really creating a plan, right, to proportionally reduce related to FTS generation and our projection. So it's been known for quite a while the areas and the things that we need to do in order to help support our district. So I'm going to go over a couple of fiscal trends so that you can see them here. We've talked about them in more depth at other places, but I wanted to show you since 2013 to 2014, we have actually had multiple budget challenges that have caused us to have cuts over the years. And what you can see is we've used I want to call it the ingenuity of Peralta Community College District. So this is no shade on anybody, but it's multiple ways we've used the tools that were before us to actually be able to stave off, ongoing significant cuts, but also taking significant cuts while we do this. So we do things like the academic year calendar. You can count students on either side, like the summer, on either side of the year. So sometimes we'd borrow from the next summer, right, to make our target count so we could get funded, or we would go back the other way and actually, right, push it to the next year. So we've used mechanisms to help us actually meet the decline in actual FTS and allow us to try to continue to hold on to dollars that were here for us in the state. Next slide. So I thought it's also important just to provide a perspective today about the cuts that the district has taken over the last number of years. So you can see here in the last 5 years, we've taken about almost $28 million in cuts to this district. So that's a significant amount of cuts. They've come from vacant positions. And I want to just be clear that it's come on the back of the schedule, frankly, right? We have done a very poor job, I think, of managing and thinking through how we would do these cuts and how we would do it. And so I want to just show contextually where we are and how this is sort of impacting us previously and impacting us in this next year. So our current year, as it's evolved, let me just walk through this. I talked about this in my spring flex address, but you can see here on the next slide, for fiscal year 24-25 in August, this is what we brought forward. So let me start at the top of the chart because I think this is important. One of the things that I recognized when I came to the district is hearing feedback from people that it was always an up and down, right? There was always money left on the table and swept and doing things. Every district, every college, every institution has a certain level of vacancies that happen each year. Those vacancies, right, mean somebody resigns and it takes us 6 months, maybe 8 months, right, to hire somebody back to fill that position. And those are what we consider vacancy savings, right? It's a funded position, but those dollars stay. And what happens is that some districts actually use a process where they budget in a certain conservative number of vacancy savings to be able to, right, recognize that you'll have that fluctuation naturally. It hasn't been a process that the district has done. So working with the team, we made this decision to set a $6 million target, which is pretty high, right? Of believing that we could galvanize and take $6 million of vacancy savings. And my goal was to create a runway for us to be able to have the discussions this last year about how serious the fiscal situation is for us and to be able to stave off cuts to individual colleges and things. When you think about that almost $28 million in cuts, folks are cut to the bone, and it's been very difficult for the colleges, the college presidents, even the district service center to take cuts without sort of having a blueprint or thinking through how we're going to move forward. So that was one key change that changed in this last year as we did the tentative and adopted budget. We also did a tentative discretionary budget reduction, thank you, where we were actually saying, how can we create efficiencies across the district community, right? So we've done many of these things, pulling all together, right? Our contracts for our gas and electric and all of these things, we're all now pulling together to try to get more bang for our buck, right? Based on coming together, finding other efficiencies and contracts, and being able to think through more thoughtfully about how we can reduce and reach a budget reduction chart change. We had by August a little change where we found that certain dollars were put into the wrong places, and so we had to actually rectify those changes in around August. So you'll see an additional dollars that were revised there to put that number at about $2.7 million. And then you'll see the shared reductions across the district, which is about $12 million reduction that we took this year, we're taking this year. Next slide. So one of the really, I wanted just to thank the fiscal team and CEO Nelson for their work in actually really thinking through how could we better forecast and see the budget. And so in this last budget book and the things that we've done, we did back years and then also look to the future to see what we could do. And so this is an important point, is that we've been able to see where we're going and what we think the fiscal impact will be. And so what you see there on the temporary employee compensation savings line, and I want to just say a couple of things. There is that $6 million that I told you about that we were actually going to say we were going to try to realize. That discretionary savings budget reduction amount there, about $2.6 million. And then the proposed budget reduction of $3 million at each. So again, we needed to, so these are the pieces that we've done in order to actually meet the reductions we needed to balance the budget. But what you saw from August until October is that we had an increase in COLA for the district at 1.07. So we actually had to put those dollars in. We also had that increase that I talked about earlier of 10% of our health insurance costs. So adding those things in, as well as calculating the reductions we needed as it relates to meeting our reserve policy, and an increase from the state chancellor's office of a deficit factor. So saying, again, you need to cut and hold back because we're actually holding the IOU for these dollars. But what you can see, I just want to point out in 25, 26. So if we're able to actualize all the cuts that we were taking across the board, those would be then felt next year. And so we've budgeted that $3 million in vacancy savings, which would be a more conservative and actual kind of cost savings that we get from vacancies there. We're saying that hopefully we can maintain the $2.6 million in discretionary budget reductions. And then those proposed reductions we took at all of our locations at $3 million, those are now baked into the budget. And that gives us a $13.4 million reduction that we are needing to plan for next year. And if we take that $13 million, you'll see if we're able to do that next year, what that does is for 26, 27, where we have a $21 million reduction that we're headed towards taking, what that do would reduce that. So if we can next year, right, take the 13 million, that would reduce that to around $7 million that we'd have to adjust. And then that adjusts each year. So hopefully that we're trying through these conversations and the way that we're putting the information out to be able to tell you a little bit more clearly where we're going and what we think. These things adjust based on what do I always call a Peralta fire, or something that happens that's unexpected, right? So these things come up where we're unexpected expenses and we're having to do things, or in the case of emergency or things that we need to do. But this is what we're looking at based on these things. And additionally, reminder to everyone that our revenue will stay flat beginning next year through the next several years, unless there's a change to the funding formula or a change to our FTS getting beyond the hold harmless level. Next slide. So there are clearly, as I'm just called out to you, impacts to 25, 26. And again, I talked about this in my spring flex, but we'll go here and show you, we are planning around scenario 1, which is here on your screen. And so this has been shared. This was shared at the Planning and Budget Committee district-wide in December. It's been shared publicly with you all, I think, at budget presentations at your campuses, and then here in my district-wide flex. But you'll see the percentage of the districts by FTS and what that deficit factor is. So again, if we have the deficit factor in, it's a 13.4 $4 million cut that we're needing to take. We also have, and we'll talk about this later, unbudgeted SEIU vacation payout from negotiations last year that was not budgeted for originally, and so that's following up here in this budget slide. We also have what is possibly the reversal of the deficit factor. So that IOU that we were talking about, we're planning for it, but at the same time, the governor may actually not have that, or the state chancellor's office. So we are anywhere between a 13.5 and an $11.5 million cut in the next year. So clearly, when I've talked about, the $27 million over the last 5 years, and again, this cut that we're about to take this year, it is very, very hard to imagine that we cannot actually sustain, right? Building a schedule that meets the needs of our students and the mission of our district and what we want to provide, providing the support services, being able to maintain our facilities and do the different things, make sure we can run efficiently. And ultimately, I want to just first of all call out many of you who have worked, the college presidents, leadership teams, the governance groups, and everybody at your campuses and areas on having these difficult discussions over the last year, and particularly the last 6 months. So we really wanted to minimize the impact to programs and people as much as possible. And so we've looked first at budgeted vacancies and unfilled positions, right? Things that have been posted, and budgeted vacancies that had not been posted, that are on the books and doing things. And so eliminating and beginning to eliminate positions like that we do not need at this time. Really looking at the potential to transfer employees to open positions that we do need, right? That there are critical to us moving and maneuvering as a district community. So finding ways to work to potentially transfer folks there. Maximizing categorical funds, where those could be used. For me, categorical funds are really meant to go in service to students, right? So how can we actually maximize those funds to be able to support the work that's happening, but actually using and offsetting some things where we can to be able to support ongoing district work. There's also looking at the reduction in reassigned time and overtime, or moving some of those costs to categorical funds if possible, but really realizing how much we spend and do in these areas, and looking at that as a way to be more efficient and reduce. And then unfortunately, there is an impact, and likely an impact to funded and filled positions. So, this is really like the hardest thing, I think, for me to talk to you all about. These are negotiated impacts. These are things that are happening, but it would be disingenuous of me to stand in front of you as a leader and not say that there will be impacts to members in our community, and that we fundamentally we cannot cut so far to the schedule or to the bone to not be able to be nimble enough to do these things. And so we are in a situation where there will be impact to employees. But what we have tried in, history will tell itself, but what I feel like we've tried and to do is really try to find soft landings, tighten the blow, and be able to do things that support the district's mission and the centered focus on students and their success as they come to us for their education. And so what I'm going to share next, and I'm going to ask Theo Nelson, so I can take a drink of water and take a little break, is to walk you through some of the things that we're doing, because really all of this so far, folks, has been a survival strategy, right? We are like clawing and whatever. We are trying to survive in a time that's been really thin, and we have not had a strategy that really helps us not only address the short-term challenges, but creates this runway for us for the time and space for Peralta to reimagine our future together. And so what we're going to be proposing and sharing with you is the proposal we're doing forward to help address some of these things. So, CEO Nelson.
All right, thank you, Chancellor. And Chancellor, thank you for your leadership thus far, and I really appreciate the direction you're trying to lead us in. Thank you, everyone. Good morning to the Peralta community. I appreciate being here, and thank you for giving us your valuable time this morning. I want to talk about the reserve history, just to give some people context of kind of where we've come from and what's required at the state level. So in 2021, the Legislative Analyst's Office opined that the district have unrestricted reserves equivalent to 5% of its annual unrestricted expenditures. The Chancellor's Office at that time did not have a system-wide guidance on restricted reserves, neither specifying a minimum or a maximum. Then in late 2021, the State Chancellor's Office, potentially mainly due to COVID-19, included emergency conditions for so districts would not lose FTS apportionment as a result of an emergency or an extraordinary condition. One of those conditions, as the Chancellor mentioned, are the LA fires. The colleges in that area would be allowed to apply for emergency condition allowance. To give you an example, these regulations require the district to demonstrate various items as it relates to Title V. This last sentence is not in code, but this is what we added. This is what the Chancellor is referring to, equaling 2 months of expenses to be in reserve. And then local control, and this is an important aspect. In conversations with the State Chancellor's Office, they acknowledge that the reserves of the district are under the local control. And while there are recommendations, it is a local matter, and there are no statutory language around the level of reserves required by a district. So I think that's important for us to understand as we continue this conversation about where we're coming from. And I want to just, as we move through this, I wanted to show you kind of the history of the reserve. Going back to 2014-15, you'll see we're at 11.3%. But we also wanted to show you what the cash value of that reserve looks like. So percentages can be deceiving sometimes. So we want to show you what the cash balance of that reserve dollar value looked like. Then you can see to the right, the percent changes in the reserve from one year to the next. You'll notice if you keep a reserve at a continuous level, you should not be going into the negative. You should be trying to leave the reserve alone so it can be used for emergency conditions. So you'll see in that first column, the second column, the reserve percentage goes from 11 to 10 to 9 to 12, and then you see it jump to 16. A lot of that reserve has to do with the fact that we received a lot of federal money for HERF and so forth during that COVID time period. And then you'll see when that money started to expire, it started to drop back down due to the fact that we were in hold harmless and our expenses were climbing. Then you'll see in 23-24, we ended at 16.94%. But in the current fiscal year, we're projected to end at 8.73%. And then later on next year at 4.81% based on our current projections, the way the budget currently sits. Now, to see that in a pictorial methodology, we want to show you the reserves and expenses, what it looks like in a line graph over that same period of time. And you'll look at the beginning over here in 24-15, you'll see that the reserves and the expenses kind of go parallel tracks to each other. And that's what you would normally see on a reserve expense line, that the district is naturally evolving in parallel tracks with the reserve and the expense lines. But then you see as we got to 1920, the reserve started to kind of really blossom. Our expenses didn't really go down. They kind of stayed flat and went up a little bit. And we should have seen expenses drop due to the fact that we were in the pandemic. Then you'll see as we come out of the pandemic in 23-24, the reserve started to drop back down. And then you'll see in 24-25 where we are now. As I talked about, we'll finish around 8%, a little over 8%. And then you'll see how the reserve projects out over time, and you'll see zero is here. So it's just something we want you to understand in a pictorial pictorial reference as it relates to the reserve over a 10-year period. So to give you some basis of the history of the reserve in the district, in 14-15 through 17-18, we were about 5% for the reserve, which was the reserve target set by the state. Then in 17-18, early 18, we changed the district changed the reserve to 10%, and that stayed in place for a number of years. And you can see where the reserve was in relation to that 10% threshold. Then in 23-24, upon recommendations of the board, the reserve was raised to 16.67%. And you'll see where we are on that red line in moment in time. And you'll see the projections based on multi-year budget that was presented in the August 2024 adopted budget book. And you'll see how the reserve is going to precipitously decline over the years based on our expense projections going forward. So with that, we wanted to say, okay, let's look at a reserve recommendation so we can address some of these concerns and give us a little runway for the next 2 to 3 years so we can make more meaningful strategic planning happen. And what does that look like? So I recommend a reserve procedure, which is noted as AP 6250, is we would ask to change the reserve to go to 8% reserve with annual escalators of 0.5%. The base percentage shall grow each year based on the prescribed schedule and annual review. Now, I'll get into that in just a minute. But also, too, as the Chancellor mentioned, we do not have currently a capital reserve, a capital maintenance reserve fund, or an equipment reserve fund. We rely specifically on bond funds, which there are a lot of capital reserve funds we cannot use for capital repairs because of the Prop 39 language around the bond. So it's important that we establish a capital maintenance reserve. This will be facilitated by using utility savings, PG&E rebates, or any excess funds. One of the things we're going to use to seed the capital maintenance fund is the district receives redevelopment money as one-time money. So we'll use the redevelopment funds to help seed plant that capital maintenance fund, and so it can grow, hopefully grow over time. Equipment is equipment for things such as instructional equipment and other things that come up. We have continuously equipment that fails, that needs to be operation, like an autoclave or something like that. Those are expensive in nature, and sometimes the departments cannot handle that hit to their budget in the middle of the fiscal year. So that's something we need to consider as well going forward. The board would have to approve any transfers in or transfers out of this fund. The bond reserve fund, I put this in the AP, but this is a statutory required reserve fund that we currently have that we have to have for our bonds to meet the Prop 39 language. And as you move forward, the AP would recommend that the Chancellor can add equal to or greater than 0.5% per annum until the reserve meets an 18% threshold. Trustees will review that escalator each year. I think one thing that's important to understand about this reserve recommendation is that if we set it at 8%, that is the new floor. So at 8%, the next year in 26-27, it would go to 8.5%. That becomes the new floor. The goal is not to drop below the new floor. So essentially you grow the floor so that way you can grow that reserve over time. And then you maintain that for additional restricted reserves for short and long-term liabilities, such as OPEB, which the Chancellor mentioned earlier, PARS fund, which I'm going to talk to in just a minute, and ongoing increases in CalSTRS and CalPERS. Important to understand that we would recommend that this requires 6 out of the 7 members of the governing board to approve transfers in and out for emergency purposes or things that would be needed. And it would be reviewed annually in the tentative budget. So what does that look like if you were to graph it out? So you see the historical reserves that I mentioned earlier. You'll see what this looks like when you recalibrate it. So we benchmark in 24-25 the reserve at 8%, and then we stair-step that reserve up to 8.5, 9, 9.5, and 10. What this does is it allows us mobility instead of us having this really unstable reserve that goes up and down this way. We have a steady projection and incline in the reserve, which actually gives us stability as it relates to rating agencies, ACCJC, and it allows us to monitor and handle some long-term liabilities for the district. So as we get into that, I want to talk about some of the recommended one-time funding from the reserves that we would use that reserve for. So while we bring down the reserve level for this fiscal year, that would allow some cash to be freed up, but there are some long-term liabilities that we need to address for the district going forward. Other post-employment benefits, as the Chancellor mentioned, we have a long-term other post-employment benefits. We want to make sure we look and protect our membership that has worked for us and gave tirelessly to the district over a number of years. We also want to look at the School Employee International SEIU's vacation payout. We'll talk about that for just a moment. Public Agency Retirement Systems, or affectionately known as PARS, that is for pension stabilization. And then we're going to be talking about a resignation incentive for the district as we move forward. So other post-employment benefits. So there are two trusts. So if you don't know anything about OPEB, this will be a good kind of brief synopsis for you. Trust one, back up. There's two trusts for the district. We are the only district that we can find that still has an open trust for OPEB for current employees. But Trust One is for employees prior to July 1, 2004 that were employed with the district, and that includes the employee, their spouse, and their dependents, and they receive lifetime benefits. Trust Two is for employees since July 1, 2004, which applies only to the employee up to 65 years of age. So when you come down, you'll see Trust One has a current liability of $223 million based on the last actuarial report. We'll have a new actuarial report done this summer, but that was funded initially by the sale of bonds in an amount of $150 million. And currently the interest accruement on that fund is helping pay for the extra liability on that fund currently. Trust Two, which has a current liability of just under 24 million, is funded by Internal Service Fund and is currently funded at 1.2 million. Many of you current employees, if you look at your pay stub, you'll see a line on your pay stub that says OPEB Trust. And so that's what that 7.5% helps go toward. We need to place one-time funds in an OPEB Trust reserve to cover market uncertainties. And the reason why that's important is if you place the money in Trust One, or if you place the money in Trust Two, the money is locked in, you can't move it. So by putting the money in an OPEB Trust reserve, it's still protected, but that way, if we have a shortfall in either trust, the money can be taken from the reserve so that those funds do not hit the general fund. One of the things that cripples us in out years is the OPEB winds up having uncertain market conditions, et cetera, and if there's an overpayment that needs to be paid, that would be a liability to the district's general fund. We have a significant growing liability in Trust Two. Trust Two has all the current employees that are on this call, plus all your colleagues. And so they're all eligible for Trust Two upon retirement. And then during negotiations, we ought to consider putting a moratorium on Trust Two going forward, just so we can actually shore up that liability long-term. Short-term, the district's positioned, and we'll go over this in just a moment, to put up to $14 million over the next 5 to 6 years based on a direction. And then also long-term, we're looking at considering property development for addressing specifically the OPEB liability. Just to give you an example, the OPEB liability, we have about a 50 to 60 year liability left in OPEB. And so that's something that's going to be well beyond us on this call. So that's something we need to set up so we can protect the people who retire from the district and gave tirelessly to this district over the years. You know, folks who gave 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years to the district, we really need to be considerate about those members who've given that time and effort and make sure we protect their trust and make sure we protect their retirement incentive that they work so hard for. To give you an example of where the trust sits in relation to the other colleges in the state, this is from 22-23. We just finished the audits for last year, so we'll update this slide once those reports are available. But this just goes to show you that 48.1% of the districts in the state have a funded trust, whereas 52% don't. If you look at our audit report, we're at 0.8% of our true funding total. That total is at 6% for Trust Two, but as overall, we're really low compared to the rest of the state. So that is something that has been noted by FITMAT, it's been noted by ACCJC, and it's a consideration for long-term liabilities for our rating agencies. In relation to the SEIU payout, some of you who are on this call who are in SEIU received your first allotment of the SEI vacation payout in December. So it was negotiated in 23-24 that there would be a cap of 350 hours for vacation time. The payout is 20% per year over 5 years in excess of that 350 hours. And the projected annual cost is about $1 million for salary and benefits. And yes, there are benefits associated with vacation payouts because we do have to pay taxes, FICA, Medicare, et cetera. Also, something to think about, something to remember is when this happened and we passed the adopted budget upon the beginning of my tenure here at the district, this was not budgeted in this current fiscal year. So we had $1 million hit to the budget that we had to absorb. And as it relates to SEI payouts. We want to make sure we set that money aside so we can protect that negotiated item for the next 4 years. So after this fiscal year, we still have 4 more years to pay out that excess vacation time. Next, I want to talk about PARS, or Public Agency Retirement Services. This is a pension rate stabilization program. Just a second. Why pre-fund pension obligations? So one of the items is it helps stabilize pension costs over time. It'll help us achieve better returns. Currently, the money we receive just sits in the county treasury. And I believe the county treasury right now is less than 0.3% for interest. So we receive virtually no extra funding for sitting in the treasury. We protect it from diversion. And so it's an irrevocable trust, but it allows us to handle rainy day activities and so forth as it relates to pension related costs going forward. So PARS is a Trust 115 account as it relates to pensions, and it does allow us to move money in and out at will. So it is not locked in once you put the funding in there. It does allow us to move money back and forth. To give you kind of a history and why this is important, you'll see that CalSTRS and CalPERS over the last 10 years has really grown. CalPERS especially. And if you look at the CalPERS numbers going out on our projections, as we've been projecting, we're at 27.05% currently for 24-25. That rises to 27.6. It goes to 28, then 29, flattens out, and it starts to drop. PERS is due for a new actuarial study next fiscal year. So I would naturally imagine these numbers will change. Something else to think about is you'll notice that STRS is flat. STRS currently requires action by the legislative body, whereas PERS can be adopted by the PERS board. And so that's why you see more stabilization when it comes to CalSTRS. But in relation to PARS, PARS allows us to help handle what CBOs like to call the cliff of pensions. So you see this natural rise. And for a few years, the state helped us offset the rises in costs, but the state no longer does that for the districts. When you look at PARS and when you look at index-based strategies, these are the 4 types of index funds that you can actually put your money into. Fixed, as you can see, virtually no volatility. Conservative, a little more, but not as much. Then you get balanced and growth going forward. And so these are the 4 options we would have under PARS to invest our pension related funds into. By pre-funding the account with one-time resources in 24-25, that would give us a seed plant so we could actually start growing those resources on an annual basis. We'd be able to deduct the pensions quarterly to cover the cost of PERS and STRS expense with no withdrawal penalties. So what would happen is we'd put the funding in to help handle the growing costs. So we budget PERS and STRS annually, like everything else related to payroll. But as we get increases, it would help us draw money from PERS. From PARS, so that way those increases don't impact the bottom line for the district. Considering what I just said about the county treasury, the yields on the conservative plan are within 4 to 8% for the fixed income plan. It's 5 to 9% on the conservative plan, and for those statisticians in the room, that's about 2 standard deviations from the mean. So I think it would be very wise for us to invest in the fixed income or the conservative-based index fund early on. It's also supported by the Community College League of California, who supports this program, and it's only for public agencies. So there's no derivatives in this fund. There's no cabs, et cetera, the things that have caused us consternation in the past. So this is also not OPEB. So I know there's a lot of fear and angst around what happened to OPEB in 2004, 2005. I can go into more history with that offline if you so choose, but the investments for OPEB were volatile at that moment in time. They invested some risky derivatives and so forth, and that is not what we're planning to do here. Those legislation has prevented that from going forward. So this will be very conservative for us to grow those funds to help us handle those long-term liabilities. The resignation incentive is something we want to put on the table and negotiate with the bargaining units. for SEIU, PFT, and Local 39. Excuse me. It would be a cash buyout at the end of the fiscal year. One thing to note, this is not a SERP. A SERP is a supplemental executive retirement plan or supplemental employee retirement plan. So, or another sponsored plan. So a SERP or another sponsored plan is an annuity that spreads it over multiple years. The reason why we're not opting to do that, because it comes at an administrative cost to the district and spreads that cost over multiple years. So we would asking to do a cash buyout in the current fiscal year. The employee would have to declare the resignation by May 1st, 2025, and they would have to resign no later than June 30th of this fiscal year. The employee would have to have 20 years of credible service to the district. And we also would have to consider the vacation liability, as I mentioned earlier, the SEIU payout, or any other member for SEIU or Local 39. It's important to understand the vacation liability would also have to be paid as it relates to anybody resigning from the district, just like it always has been.
So thank you so much, CEO Nelson. So what he's done is encapsulate just high level areas of what we want to do with the one-time sort of adjustment to the reserve. So we have graduated rates so we can plan efficiently and see a pathway forward for our district and be more thoughtful about the planning. I see lots of questions in the Q&A and lots of questions in the chat that are related to these next things. So let me go to the next slide and just show you again why the recommendation is, so you can see it here. Again, we start with the base year where we'll take one-time dollars and put it into investments in these strategies that will help address the long-term liabilities for our district and create a pathway forward where we're planning and being fiscally smart about how we're approaching all of these things and the interest in growing back our enrollment and being thoughtful about actually putting funds and resources into those things. And so this just gives you an idea of that 8% scenario. You can see those things: health and welfare, PARS, initial investment, the PERS increases over the years, the OPEB distribution and contributions we make to that to help show, again, the community and be funding those liabilities. And then again, the resignation incentive that we are negotiating. This is negotiated, so it is not a done thing, but something that we proposed and is on the table. Next slide, please. So I talked about the challenges for long-range planning, and many of these things start to check the box of recommendations addressing these things. So we are being methodical and moving forward and trying again to provide the foundation the district needs to move forward. Next slide, please. So, you know, I think the questions in the chat and these other things is, how do we achieve long-term fiscal sustainability? So I won't answer every question the way they want, but first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the people who have actually emailed me directly, come with ideas, said they have interest in things. I see these things about what should we do? How will we do this? You know, these other things, moving the district office, selling land, all of these things are part of the discussion that we need to be having about where we go and how we actually take and think about our resources in a different way so that we can actually invest them where we need to do, which is in the direct work and the success of our student. So I want to just say, like, there's been some questions about, like, why did we not? Who didn't do things previously? Like, why are we just doing it now? We've known, and I'm telling you, we have known for years. I knew when we were the president of Laney College back in the day, right? Has been this thing. I think there's lots of reasons. I can't go back and look historically at what happened. We can't go back and change where we're at. What I can promise you, and I've told you from the day I started, is that as deeply as you care about the district, so do I, so does our leadership team. And what we're trying to do is come forward with conversations about how we actually do this. So this has been the runway, this has been the conversation, and it is really serious, obviously, to get to this point. Next slide. So I talked about moonshot thinking. This was Robert Bram and I were having this conversation and other things. But again, moonshot thinking, if you think about President John F. Kennedy, he said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And our students and our community and our colleagues deserve nothing less. And I want to tell you, it is in the DNA of this district to really have ingenuity, to change its function, education, to look differently, to build new programs, to change and flow based on this. We didn't have Vista College back in the day, and then we had Berkeley City College, right? We didn't have College of Alameda immediately. We used to own Feather River College as well. Feather River College was in our district 250 miles away. We are a nimble and thing. It is in the DNA of our district and roots to be able to have the conversations that we need to have moving forward. And I'm going to be relying on, next slide, please, what you all said when you hired me, the end of shared governance. We don't have any. You all are doing things, right? We have worked over the last 7 months and years. I want to thank the leadership from the academic and faculty senates, the classified senates, the student senates, the administration who've come together to build a shared governance model that really looks at centering students and actually coming for shared understanding and doing things. And so today, this afternoon, we will begin to set the stage for actually hearing from the community and getting ideas in a short runway of the things we can do. And the things that you've written in the chat and the things that you're talking about are all options on the table for us to consider as we move forward. We all have different expertise and plays things. I want to encourage and thank everybody again for the time that they've actually taken to think through ideas and do things. And I want to just galvanize folks to remember that there are things you can do in your own stead. How are we serving students? Who's not here? Where are they gone? We want to hear this information and do these things. And so we'll be setting the stage for our governance groups to begin thinking about that ahead. So the next slide is, you'll see as a core function of our governance model is this inquiry and decision-making model. Today we will begin defining what our desired outcome is. What kind of district do we want for our students, right? Where do you want to go? Stop thinking about the past and think forward to the future, reimagine what we are. I have deep belief in this community and our ability to come together and to do the things that we need to do. And I'll tell you, this is a very, we are in a difficult time, and we can cleave together or we can cleave apart and be, right, you know, dislocated from each other. We are tethered together in a real way. There is not one, and I've been talking to the college presidents a lot about this, right? We are one district community. We want to fight for this or do that or defend all of these things. And I think now is the time, right, where we coalition build, we build together. We go from the story of self to the story of us to the story of now, and we're actually moving that forward in the future. So you will hear more. We will be doing more presentations. We'll have more conversations over this semester to pull in ideas and to share where we're going. But that really concludes today's budget town hall. The recording will go out to the district community along with the slides. We will also send out a QR place for you to send questions or ideas, right? So you can submit them to me. I'm reading the emails that are coming in. I'm trying to respond to people. I'll be sharing that information with our governance committees, but we are going to rely on, and I'm going to tell you this, they say a lot of things about Peralta. They say a lot of things about Peralta. We say a lot of things about Peralta. Externally, they say a lot of things about Peralta. I would, again, tell you, I bet on Peralta all day, every day, and our ability to do really remarkable things. We've done it. Our students do it every day. I know that we can actually do this. And so I think part of this is going to be open to ingenuity and ideas and open to believing that the governance process that we all say we believe in actually can come up with clear and good, helpful, thoughtful recommendations that help us all make a decision, from the Board of Trustees, who is supportive of the work that you all are doing, to myself, to each of you on the ground. So thank you so much for your service to the district. Thank you so much for choosing Peralta and for being here for our students in this community. We need you now more than ever, and I'm grateful and grateful and grateful. Thank you so much. Happy Friday.